You offered me everything, even when you had almost nothing, and I spent my whole life believing I was rich. But last night, you showed me what it means to have a real family. The snow was falling lightly when Lorenzo, now recognized in his impeccable dark suit, uttered words that froze the Christmas morning around the small corner bakery. The three men who had taken him in the night before, unaware that he owned half the shops on that same decorated street, stood motionless, trying to understand how the silent stranger with whom they had shared soup and bread was now there, his eyes brimming with tears and his voice choked with emotion. Around them, the houses decorated with colorful twinkling lights reflected on the white ground, creating an almost magical aura as Lorenzo slowly knelt, holding the hand of the oldest of the homeless men, as if that gesture were a confession of what life had truly lacked for him. "You saved me yesterday. You all know this," he says, his breath forming clouds in the icy air. "And today, I want to save you too." This is the climax, the moment that grabs the viewer's heart. From here, the story goes back to the previous night, and everything begins. Before we delve into this amazing story, tell me which city and state you're watching from. Leave a comment and I'll reply with gratitude. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and like this video. We want to share more stories like this. On that same Christmas Eve, when the main street looked like a movie set, with houses lined up as if following a secret script of lights and colors, Lorenzo Duarte. He walked with his hands in the pockets of his dark coat, feeling the cold wind pierce through his expensive clothes, as if there wasn't enough protection for the kind of emptiness he carried. The twinkling lights blinked in perfect sequence, reflecting on the snow-covered ground and drawing colorful shadows around his steps. Families hurried past, children dragging plastic sleds, couples sharing scarves, elderly people in woolen hats looking like small points of light amidst the intense white of the night. The smells of roast turkey, hot chocolate, and freshly baked bread escaped through the half-open windows and doors, reminding everyone that this was the most anticipated moment of the year. For almost everyone, except for him. Lorenzo could buy any table, any party, any decoration he wanted, but no amount of money could fill the void that had haunted him for years. The absence of a family nearby, of voices calling his name informally, of someone waiting for him with a plate set on the table. The empire he had built had placed him at the top of the business world, but had pushed him to the bottom of the pit of human relationships. The phone only rang out of self-interest. The smiles around him were rehearsed, the conversations filtered by fear or ambition. That's why, that night, he had chosen to walk alone down the decorated street, as if searching in each lit window for a fragment of the life he could have had. When he reached the small square at the end of the street, a place surrounded by old wooden benches and a tall pine tree decorated with red ribbons, Lorenzo sat on the furthest bench, the one almost no one saw, and let his body sink under the weight of years lived in silence. Snow settled on the shoulders of his coat, on his impeccably styled hair, on the hands he kept intertwined in his lap. Around him, the city vibrated, but inside him, everything seemed mute. It was then that he saw in the darkest corner of the square a small, flickering flame. 3 men were gathered around an improvised bonfire, using pieces of wood and cardboard. They had no colorful lights, no lavish supper, no warm house. They had only a torn blanket each, a small pot resting on bricks, and a dented thermos beside it. Lorenzo looked away, as he always did when he saw misery so closely, not out of contempt, but because it reminded him that, even with all his money, he never knew how to truly use his wealth to reach those who needed it most. However, that night, he wasn't the first to notice. They were. The older one, with a white beard and a firm gaze, was the first to notice that the well-dressed man was sitting alone, far from joyful, his shoulders slumped and his face marked by a kind of sadness that wasn't hidden behind his suit. He nudged his companion beside him and discreetly pointed with his chin, as if recognizing in the other's posture something that life had shown him up close many times. Then he stood up with some difficulty, pulling his patched coat closer to his body, and walked towards the bench where Lorenzo was sitting. Each of his steps left deep marks in the snow, as if the weight of his own stories were greater than the cold of that night. Upon approaching, he didn't ask, "Who are you?" didn't comment on the expensive clothes, wasn't intimidated by the man's distant air. He simply said, in a hoarse but welcoming voice, "Young man, it's too cold to be alone like this. We don't have much room here, but there's room for one more." The simple phrase pierced the silence between them with unexpected force. Lorenzo slowly raised his eyes, surprised that someone had noticed his presence without first looking at his watch or the cut of his suit. Behind the white-bearded man, two other men watched, one younger with dark hair and a restless gaze, the other very thin, with his arms crossed trying to contain the trembling of his hands. There was no pity in their eyes. There was something different. Recognition. From someone who understands what it is to be ignored, unseen, left aside. Lorenzo took a few seconds to respond, as if his own language were unaccustomed to being invited anywhere other than a meeting room. The man extended a slightly cracked plastic cup from which the steam of cheap tea escaped in small clouds. "Come with us. The night passes faster when there's someone to talk to," he added, without insistence, without pressure, offering that small space around the campfire as if it were a place of honor. Lorenzo took a deep breath, looked around, saw the families rushing to their homes, the doors closing, the lights multiplying in the windows. He thought of the empty table that awaited him in his mansion, the glasses lined up by servants, the impeccably roasted turkey that no one would touch with true affection. Then he looked again at those three men, at the meager campfire, at the pot of soup that barely fed three, let alone four, and at the cup that now trembled slightly in the white-bearded man's hand. Then, for the first time in many years, he made a movement contrary to his habit. Instead of refusing, instead of turning away, instead of hiding behind elegant walls, he simply stood up and said in a low voice, almost as a plea, "Can I really go?" The smile he received in response was so genuine that it seemed to light up the square again, a light that didn't come from the power lines, but from a much deeper place. "Yes, you can. No one spends Christmas alone here," replied the old man, making room beside the bonfire. And so, Lorenzo walked through the snow, each step dismantling an invisible part of the armor he had worn his whole life, until he sat down next to the three strangers who, that night, would be the first to see him as he truly was. Just a man needing a place to exist. As Lorenzo sat around the makeshift campfire, he felt the weak warmth rise to his hands as he held the cup the old man had handed him, and realized that this simple tea warmed him more than the expensive wines he usually savored at business dinners. The smoke rose in irregular spirals, mingling with the visible breath of everyone there, and for a moment the square seemed to shrink, as if the whole world fit into that small circle made of patched coats, timid fire, and tired gazes. "My name is Elias," said the white-bearded man, then pointing to the other two, "That one over there is Jonas, and the skinny one is Raphael." The introduction was simple. No surnames, no titles, no companies, because in that circle no one needed titles to be heard. Lorenzo hesitated a little, but finally replied, "I am Lorenzo." He didn't say Duarte, didn't explain who he was, didn't mention the stores, didn't talk about investments, numbers, or achievements. That night, for the first time in a long time, he chose to be just a name. Elias smiled, as if approving of the choice without understanding, and began stirring the pot with the bent-handled spoon. "We don't have supper, but we have soup. "It warms the stomach and eases the homesickness a little," he commented, serving his friends first and the visitor last, as if maintaining a silent order of respect built over the nights they had shared there. Lorenzo accepted the plastic plate, observing the thin soup, with few pieces of potato and the occasional stray grain of rice. He knew that for them, that quantity was already an achievement. And yet, they had made room for one more. While they ate, the snow continued to fall, and the distant sounds of families inside their houses seemed to come from another dimension. At a certain point, Jonas, the youngest, whose eyes were marked by a restless glint that mixed shame and courage, broke the silence. "So, Lorenzo, what are you doing here alone tonight? Normally, someone with a coat like that is somewhere warm, right?" he asked, not out of malice, but out of the curiosity of someone who has been too forgetful not to find the presence of someone seemingly so different strange. Lorenzo stared at his plate for a few seconds and, instead of making up an excuse, answered with an honesty that surprised him. "I have a house. I have many things. No one to share any of this with today." The sentence fell on the group like a heavy snowflake. Raphael, the thinnest, who had remained silent until then, raised his eyes and stared at him as if trying to see beyond the clothes, beyond the well-groomed hands, beyond the posture. "Not having anyone to share with hurts more than not having anything to eat," he murmured, almost to himself, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Elias nodded silently, and Lorenzo felt that sentence press against a place inside him that he had been trying to numb for years. Inspired by the atmosphere, Elias began to tell his story. He said he once had a house, a wife, a small neighborhood business, that his wife had fallen ill, that he had spent everything he had trying to treat her, and when she passed away, he also lost the will to continue. The rent was overdue, the debts piled up, the business went bankrupt. One day, he woke up with nowhere to sleep. Since then, the square had become an extension of his world. Jonas spoke next, revealing that he had family in another city, but a wrong choice, involving debt and bad company, had distanced him from everyone. "My mother thinks I'm still lost, and I kind of am," he confessed, looking at the fire. "But sometimes I dream of the day I'll knock on her door again with my head held high." Raphael, in a low voice, recounted that he was working in construction when an accident took away some of the strength in one of his legs, and he ended up being fired. Without training, without a support network, he descended the steps of life too quickly. As the stories unfolded, Lorenzo felt something inside him break and mend itself simultaneously. He recognized in their accounts a kind of fall he had never experienced, but he also saw something he completely lacked. Even with so little, they kept saying, "we," never just me. They shared guilt, pain, food, blankets, silence. They shared the little they had. And this, for Lorenzo, was a mirror image of his own biography. When Elias finished talking about his wife, Lorenzo found himself asking more, interested in details he would normally ignore, and realized he was there not as someone who offers, but as someone who learns. At a certain point in the evening, Jonas pulled out an old bag and took out a small battery-powered radio, almost silent. He tuned it to a random station, and a Christmas song began to play softly, almost swallowed by the wind. Even so, the three smiled as if they had received an expensive gift. "Every year we listen to this song here. It's kind of our tradition," explained Jonas, giving the radio 2 taps to clear the static. Lorenzo listened to the lyrics about returning home, reconciliation, forgiveness, and new beginnings, and felt a lump in his throat that he could barely hide. At one point, Elias turned to him and asked, with the naturalness of someone who has nothing to lose, "And you, Lorenzo, what's your story? At what point did you find yourself alone like this?" He took a deep breath, looked at the reflection of the Christmas lights in the eyes of the three men, and realized that if there was a place in the world where he could tell the truth without being judged, it was there, in that circle of men that the city pretended not to see. And then he began for the first time to talk not about his business, but about his childhood in a humble neighborhood, about his father who worked too hard, about his mother who dreamed of seeing him happy, about the promise he made to never again be in need, and which, without realizing it, led him to sacrifice any relationship that didn't fit into his schedule. He spoke of relationships that turned into contracts, of friendships that turned into cold partnerships, of a huge house that echoed its own silence. As he spoke, the tears he had held back for so many years finally found space to fall, mingling with the snow on his face, and the three of them, instead of moving away, drew a little closer, like someone instinctively protecting someone who is unarmed for the first time. The night dragged on, as if it had forgotten to pass, lulled by the intermittent glow of the twinkling lights that still gleamed on the facades of the houses, and by the fire that bravely resisted in the small, makeshift bonfire. At some point, the old radio stopped working, but that no longer mattered. The music had been replaced by conversations, timid laughter, respectful silences, and confidences that transformed that circle into something none of them had been able to name for a long time. A kind of makeshift family built there on the cold ground of the square in the middle of Christmas Eve. When the church clock struck midnight, the sound of the bells mingled with the bursts of fireworks in the distance, and for a few moments the sky filled with colorful lights that mirrored the spectacle of colors captured in the eyes of those who dreamed. Jonas raised his plastic cup with the last sip of tea and said, in a toasting tone, "To the family we find along the way, because sometimes it's the only one that appears." Elias repeated the gesture, Raphael too, and almost disbelieving what he was doing. Lorenzo raised his empty glass, feeling that this moment was worth more than any lavish party he had ever been to. After midnight, the cold intensified, biting, and Raphael began to cough frequently, his body huddled under his thin coat. Lorenzo noticed, and, not thinking like a calculating businessman, but like someone who feels, he took off his own fine wool scarf and placed it on the boy's shoulders. "Keep this today," he said, while the boy protested, "but this must be too expensive." Lorenzo shook his head firmly. "Today, what's expensive is seeing you shivering like this." The phrase came out naturally, without pretense, and the three looked at him with a mixture of surprise and gratitude that he wasn't used to receiving when it didn't involve money, a contract, or a benefit. Gradually, exhaustion began to overwhelm their bodies. Jonas leaned against a tree trunk. Elias sat closer to the fire. Raphael lay down on pieces of cardboard, and Lorenzo, without knowing exactly how, ended up stretching his legs beside them, leaning back on the bench, his eyes fixed on the dark sky that still held some late fireworks. Before sleep overtook him, he heard Elias murmur softly, "Thank you for not turning your face away from us. Sometimes all we want is for someone to sit here without rushing." Lorenzo wanted to reply, to say that he was the one who should be thanking them, but his heavy body and relieved heart surrendered to tiredness, and for the first time in many years he fell asleep without to-do lists in the morning, without contracts waiting to be signed, without repressed guilt. He fell asleep beside three men whom the city called invisible, but who, that night, had been the only ones to see him completely. As the first rays of sunlight began to tinge the white snow with gold, the decorated street slowly awoke. Families opened their windows. Some children ran to see the presents left in the living room. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the cold air. Lorenzo woke up with a slightly numb face and his fingers stiff from the cold, but his chest felt lighter than he remembered feeling. He looked around and saw Elias tidying up the empty pot, Jonas trying to warm his hands by clapping them together, Raphael adjusting the scarf he had borrowed. Everyone was preparing for another day like so many others, walking through the city in search of odd jobs, some food, some not so harsh gaze. But for Lorenzo, that day would be different. He got up, looked around, and for a moment everything seemed clearer. The decorated houses, the simple square, the tall pine tree, the bench where he had sat alone the night before. He felt a decision growing inside him with unquestionable clarity. "Where do you usually get your coffee?" he asked, adjusting his coat as if organizing his thoughts. Jonas shrugged without drama. "When we can, we grab a stale loaf of bread from the bakery on the corner. When we can't, we drink water and wait for the church's communal lunch." Lorenzo nodded, observing the bakery still closed, its interior lights off, and a simple "Merry Christmas" sign hanging. He knew who owned that establishment. He knew, in fact, who owned almost everything there. Then he spoke with a serenity that surprised the three. "Today, we're not going to wait. When that door opens, you come in with me." They looked at each other, confused. Raphael, suspicious, asked, "Are you sure? The people there never really like it when we come in." Lorenzo took a deep breath, feeling that this was the moment to admit everything he had hidden that night. "Trust me just a little longer," he replied, and there was so much firmness and gratitude in that request that, for the first time, they decided to trust without question. Minutes later, the bakery door opened, and the smell of freshly baked bread wafted through the street. An employee began setting the tables, and the owner appeared behind the counter, adjusting his apron. Lorenzo walked ahead, the three following him, half hesitant, half curious. As soon as he entered, the owner's eyes widened, immediately recognizing the man who rarely appeared there in person, but whose name was on all the contracts. "Mr. Duarte? Good morning, I didn't know you were coming today. If I had known, I would have prepared something special." Lorenzo interrupted him with a polite but firm gesture. "The special today isn't for me, it's for them," he said, pointing to Elias, Jonas, and Raphael, who huddled near the door, looked ready to be thrown out at any moment. The owner gave the trio an automatic, disapproving look, the same look they were used to receiving everywhere, but looked away as soon as he noticed Lorenzo's posture. "You can prepare the best coffee in the house with whatever freshest ingredients you have. It's on me," he added. The three men exchanged embarrassed glances. Elias tried to protest. "There's no need for that, we manage with little." Lorenzo smiled, that different smile, the kind that didn't appear in meetings or magazine photos, and calmly replied, "Last night, you shared your little with me. Today, I want to share the much I have with you, and it's not just the coffee." They sat together at a table near the window, from where they could still see the square, the already extinguished bonfire, and the footprints in the snow. The waiter brought baskets of bread, butter, cold cuts, hot coffee, milk, and cake. For the three of them, it seemed an almost impossible scene. Jonas looked at the table as if afraid to touch it. Raphael clutched his scarf with one hand and his glass with the other. And Elias kept his eyes brimming with tears, breathing deeply to avoid crying. When everyone had their plate served, Lorenzo placed his hands on the table, looked at each one of them, and finally introduced himself as the world knew him. "My name is Lorenzo Duarte. I own the shops on this street, the market that you sometimes help unload, the company that sponsors the city's Christmas lights, and I'm also the man you found alone on the park bench last night." The silence that followed was dense. Jonas's eyes widened. Raphael almost dropped his glass. Elias blinked several times, trying to process this information in the man who had spent the night listening to stories and crying beside them. "You... are that Lorenzo?" Jonas asked, still in disbelief. "I am. And precisely because of who I am, I was ashamed to spend my whole life without seeing you. But yesterday, when you called me, gave me soup, tea, space, You showed me that the wealth I always sought wasn't within my companies. It was in what you did without expecting anything in return." He paused, took a deep breath, and continued, "So today, I want to repay that in the only way I know how, by changing your lives." Lorenzo explained calmly that from that day on, none of the three would sleep in the square anymore. He had empty apartments that would be prepared to receive them. He would offer work within his companies, respecting each person's abilities. Elias could help in the stockroom, Jonas would be enrolled in a course and then given an administrative role. Raphael would see a doctor and, once better, would have a suitable position in one of the stores. Furthermore, Lorenzo would commit to supporting Jonas's reunion with his mother, paying for Raphael's medical treatment, and helping Elias resolve the situation with the documents he had lost. While he spoke, there was no ostentation, only a silent determination. The result of someone who understood, late but still in time, the true purpose of everything he had built. Elias couldn't hold back his tears. "Why, Lorenzo? Why do all this for people the whole city has chosen to forget?" Lorenzo looked at the old man's calloused hands, at his eyes full of wounded hope, and replied with the same phrase that the story's hook carried. "Because you offered me everything, even when you had almost nothing, and I spent my whole life believing I was rich. But last night, beside that bonfire, I discovered that true wealth is having someone to wake up with the next day." Outside, the twinkling lights still shone. The snow continued to fall slowly, and the street remained the same as any other Christmas. But inside that simple bakery, 4 men, so different from each other, were rewriting the next chapters of their lives. And, for all of them, that would be remembered as the night and the morning when the poorest Christmas dinner in the world saved the richest man in town.